Welcome, everyone. This is Ron Ness, President of North Dakota Petroleum Council. We're glad you joined us for today's executive speaker series. We have two outstanding guests today, Lynn Helms, the Director of the Department of Mineral Resources, and Justin Kringstad, the Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We want to thank our Williston-based Petroleum Conference sponsors for sponsoring this event, and we look forward to hosting that event next May. With that, if you have additional ideas for future speakers, we'd be welcome to look into that and try and get another session like this at a future date. So with no further ado, we'll move on to our speakers. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We're extending this as part of our Williston Basin Petroleum Conference, and we're moving that to May. And thank you to those sponsors who are sticking with us and going to be prepared for a great event in May. So we're going to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen today. If you have questions for Lynn and Justin, go ahead and pop your question in there, and we will get to those as soon as they are done presenting. We're going to start, Mr. Helms, we're going to start with you today. Welcome. You're still on mute, so there you go.
The button kept moving around. Good morning, Ron, and everyone that's on. Thank you for joining us. It's nice to be with you this morning. I promise you that my tie is a North Dakota oil field sunrise, not a sunset. So hopefully you can see that sun coming up. It's always darkest just before the dawn. So with that, I wanted to share a few graphs as I talk through the current activity. I've never done this share the screen thing before, so we're going to give that a try. I'm going to share that screen. And share. Okay. Are you seeing it? Or are you still seeing the video?
Nope, the screen looks great, Lynn. Great photo, right. By the way. I might steal that one.
What a beautiful shot. This is from the Killdeer Mountains, looking a little bit to the northeast. And you can see it's just incredible how they blended that location in. You'd have to get up on top of it to even see it. But it's a beautiful place in North Dakota. Just very quickly, going to do a little oil activity snapshot, talk a little bit about production prices, gas capture, and then a few things that I've noticed as we get ready for tomorrow's director's cut. Activity-wise, all you can really say is yikes. So what you're looking at here is drilling and completions. And as you can see, we just fell off a cliff in May and June in terms of rig count. We were running along in the mid-50s pretty steadily from the middle of last year, well, almost since 2017 until March or so. And we are down to 11 drilling rigs today. I think what I'm hearing is that people are drilling only what's necessary. A couple of reasons, actually three. One is trying to sustain the best and most efficient drilling crews that we have. But the primary two are, does somebody have a federal permit or a federal lease that has to get developed? And does somebody have a federal right-of-way that they need to act on? And what's driving that, of course, is all the uncertainty about this fall's election and where that might lead come January. So fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, even though the cash flow and maybe the capital flow may not really justify this much drilling activity in North Dakota today, the political uncertainty certainly justifies it. And maybe Ron's going to talk to that a little bit. One of the things that you see there is that red drilling efficiency curve, and you can see a lot of noise starting to show up there. And that's just what happens when you drop from 55 rigs to 11. And so spuds and everything get all mixed up as rigs move to the yard instead of moving to a new location. And so I think that's just noise. I think what we're seeing is the 11 or 12 most efficient drilling crews that we have in North Dakota are the ones that are still working. If you jump over to the completion side, you can see that what I've graphed there is North Dakota crude price, and it certainly fell way below what it takes to sustain completions, and still is not back up there. What you'll notice is that completion activity has become extremely volatile. We had 58 completions in April. We dropped down to 12 in May and only 37 in June. That 37 is half of what we need to overcome the natural decline. And Justin will talk about that a little bit more as well. But in order to maintain production and keep up with the decline of the Bakken well count that we have, we need 70 to 80 completions a month. And we get that when oil prices, when North Dakota sweet crude is running $40 to $45, which is West Texas Intermediate at 45 to 50. So we're still below that. The prices certainly justify keeping wells on production, but adding to the well count, we're still below that price point. Drilling rig count, yesterday was 12. That's what this map reflects. So one of those has dropped off. I'm not sure which one it is. I could run and check. I should have checked that before I threw the map up there. It's really retracted to the core of the core. And so you can see if I was to throw the federal acreage up on there on this map, you'd see that a lot of drilling in and around federal acreage. Interestingly enough, there's one lodgepole well being drilled right now down there in Stark County. But for the most part, what we're looking at here is people are drilling where they've got rights of ways, some type of federal restrictions on a timing, on a permit, or they're developing Fort Berthold minerals, which they've got federal permits and rights of ways on. That's really driving the most of it. Just a quick snapshot. You can see the development map over there. Still a lot of underdeveloped areas in the Bakken. I think one of the takeaways that I'm hoping people get is that the resource is still just as great as it ever was. The price is not. So when you look at active well counts, way down. And so at the end of June, we ended June with over 6,000 inactive wells in the state. And it takes $40 to $45 WTI to put those back on, and that's where we are. So what we're seeing today is that number has dropped to about 4,200. So we've gone from 6,100 at the peak of the shut-in period when people were really restricting production, still at about 4,200 wells in the inactive category. One surprise to me is the waiting on completions. We were at 952. It looks like today we're at 899. So that number has not climbed. And so the completion crews, as few as there are, have been able to keep up with this very low rig count. And so we've gone from 25 to 1 to 3, and we're running 2 or 3 completion crews. And so we're not building an inventory of DUCs. I expected that we would, and so that's an interesting surprise. The other interesting surprise is how steady the permitting has been. So we've got almost 1,500 active permits out there, and in July we issued 92, June was 72, so May was 59. So people are continuing to permit wells and looking at next year's activity. It may help that under the Bakken Restart Task Force under regulatory relief, and maybe you guys know this, maybe you don't, but we have waived through the end of this year the fee on renewing a drilling permit. I know $100 is not a big item, but we want to give every incentive we can for people to keep those drilling permits active. And we continue to get increased density applications. So we've got over 13,000 wells approved out through Industrial Commission Order 30826. So our total well count of everything that's capable of production is 35,000, which we're beginning to hone in on or zoom in on that 40,000 minimum well count. But we still got a ways to go. And we do anticipate that 65,000 is our real landing number. So we've got a long ways to go and a lot of resource yet to develop. There's really nothing you can say that would overstate the drop in production. And so, we saw from May to June about a 3.6% increase, about 30,000 barrels a day. But that followed a 15% and a 30% month-to-month decline. So 15% decline April to May, and March to April, and 30% April to May. And then a little bit of an increase in June with oil prices recovering a little bit. This is sort of a look forward, so you can see where production has gone as you zoom in. You can see what natural decline would do, so you can see that there was a lot of production restriction or wells shut in, much more than the natural decline would have resulted in. But you can also see how important that 70 to 80 completions are every month in order to accomplish this curve, which is the revenue projection for the state, or production projection for state revenue. That's where we placed it. And in order to grow production, which is this blue curve, we've got to have 1,200 to 1,500 wells every year. So 100 to 110 or 120, 100 to 120 wells completed every month. And we're falling far short of that. Like I said, June completions 37. So when we look at prices, happy to see that recovery, but you can see that it's become just a little bit tenuous there. And both WTI and EIA are showing a long, slow recovery. And that's because we're still way up in record territory in terms of U.S. crude oil stocks. It has come down significantly the last 2 weeks, so that's promising. But EIA is not forecasting a balance between supply and demand until well into second quarter of next year. So we have a long, slow recovery ahead of us, and you saw some of those price points back there for really actively completing wells or drilling wells. We don't reach those price points until very late in 21, maybe even 2022. Looking at gas capture, very important date coming up, November 1st of 2020. The gas capture requirement jumps to 91%. And I want to talk about a really important date, and that is the September 22nd Industrial Commission meeting, when they will be looking at new revisions to the gas capture policy. So we're going to want to have conversations with you all. My intention is next week to forward a draft revision and have your folks work it over and give comments back to us. When we look at natural gas production, it followed oil production. And one thing I want to point out here is take a look at that Watford City natural gas price if you're going on northern border. And what this really means and why this is such a critical discussion is that natural gas right now is a net negative in every way, shape, and form. Natural gas liquids, even the natural gas itself is a net negative. And so it's an operating cost as opposed to a profitable enterprise at this point. And when we look out at gas capture, you can see that we're well above the current goal of 88%, and we're on our way to get to that 91%. But a lot of gas capture infrastructure investment has been postponed to next year, and we're trying to wrap our head around how do we get the $2.7 billion in investment that we need next year to come in and make gas capture move forward, sustaining that 91% as we go back into a growth mode. that's all the slides that I was going to talk about. As I talk about gas capture, I should just point out that non-Fort Berthold Bakken hit 92% in June, but we are still really, really struggling on Fort Berthold, 85% capture. And the fee was at 86, the trust at 85. And so we've got to have some serious discussions about how we work with that and accommodate that. And as you know, a judge in California kicked out the Trump 2018 BLM waste prevention rule. And so in about 2 months, the Obama 2016 rule kicks back in, unless the judge in Wyoming puts a stay on that. And then that takes us back to, is it NTL 4, I think it is, which is a 1980s vintage rule, which isn't really any good for your industry either. So federal lands and tribal lands are under some serious pressure. The other important date that I want to talk to you about, going back here, oil conditioning. So next week, the Industrial Commission will be taking a look at what to do in light of the PHMSA preemption, what to do with oil conditioning. And so they will be taking up either an amendment or a rescission of the oil conditioning order. And your feedback on that is greatly appreciated. With that, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, Ron?
No, I think we'll jump in a little bit now, Lynn. A couple of questions coming in, and we'll let you answer them. If you're waiving permit fees, are you also waiving a $100 extension fee for the temporarily abandoned wells?
We are not at this point, but let's talk about that because that makes sense to me in this production environment. So I should have talked a little bit more about Bakken restart. And so that is one of the items that we have on here for consideration. And I appreciate your bringing it up. So I will talk with the Industrial Commission members about that as we prepare for next week's meeting.
Okay, Lynn, I think in terms of oil conditioning, you know, my response would be to that is that I think this thing has been vetted through and through, and why would we put Bakken oil at a disadvantage to all other oil across the country in terms of having a conditioning standard that now has been vetted through PHMSA, vetted through every way, and why wouldn't we mirror the 14% standard vapor pressure like PHMSA and all other oil plays across the country have, when it's been proven now to show via the studies that the Bakken barrel from a standpoint of that risk is no different than an Eagle Ford barrel or a Niobrara barrel or any other barrel. So that would be the message that I think all we're doing is disadvantaging ourselves. You didn't, and again, put your questions in the Q&A area, and I'll keep checking those. Lynn, you didn't talk a lot about the well plugging and reclamation program. I think there's a great interest, and as I have said many times, I was up in West Hope last week, and very few things. There's some struggles with that program, obviously, to get everything right. I know your group has worked really, really hard on it, but the number of service companies that are able to keep people working, and it's unlike anything I've seen in my 21 years here in terms of the interest, the ability to just keep people engaged and in the patch and ready for the rebound. So we know it's critically important, and it's doing what the CARES Act funds were intended to do, is put people to work. So we greatly appreciate the support of the Industrial Commission and your leadership in getting that done. But you want to give everybody an update on where we're at, how many wells the state confiscated, what we're seeing for activity, the timeline, and then I think the next step on those wells that are being plugged is the reclamation process.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Ron. And as I flipped through the papers here, I saw that I was going to talk about that. So we actually, this week, are running at about 2/3 of what we think is going to be our peak work in the well plugging and reclamation plugging aspect. We got 14 rigs running today. And so we think we've got 400 people. That's what the daily reports indicate. We got 400 people back to work. We have the dominant package right now is in Burke, Renville, and Bottineau County, but we got some folks working in McKenzie and even down in Stark and Billings County. So the Industrial Commission so far has signed orders to confiscate 293 wells, and those are going to work out over a time span because there are some legal processes that have to work themselves out. And we had a hearing last week, and next week I'll be taking orders to the commission to confiscate about another 93 wells. So we're going to end up right at that 400 number. And our goal by next week is to have 20 rigs out there plugging and have 600 people actively working. We're opening bids tomorrow on the reclamation aspect, and we should have some wells ready to start reclamation by the end of next week. We think that part of the project is going to employ another 500 folks. So by this time next month, we should have around 1,100 unemployed people that have been put back to work plugging wells. Every well's been a surprise so far in terms of what the well file said and what we've actually found, but these are the best crews that there are in the patch, and so we're really happy with the way the project is ramping up. And like I said, we're at about 400 people working today that weren't working a week ago, and we'll have another 200 next week. The following week, we should be able to put another 500 people to work as we start reclaiming locations.
Lynn, a couple of questions coming in here, and I guess two comments from me. I hope you create a graph like this showing the number of people that are working each week, because I think I've heard from about half of them, and certainly their employers. So in your presentations, to show exactly how many people out in those counties particularly that are working. Those are families and North Dakota families that are being put back to work. So again, we applaud you for that. In terms of the question comes in here, will the P&A program continue into 2021, 2022? And I think you may have answered that, but you may want to clarify that on the CARES Act funds.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. The CARES Act funds currently expire midnight December 30th of this year. There is some talk in Congress about extending that deadline, and if they do, we will certainly take advantage of it. We are also working with Congress right now to pass, and it's got really strong bipartisan support, to pass an extended program through the Department of Interior and Department of Energy that will work through Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission and put together a 5-year program that is modeled after exactly what we're doing today in North Dakota. So the plan is that states will be able to apply for up to $25 million a year. Some states have a much bigger problem than North Dakota, but any state will be able to qualify for up to $25 million a year and model their program after exactly what we're doing here in North Dakota. So my expectation is that there will be ongoing programs in 21 through 25 that will continue to take care of idle and orphan wells, and we'll have that capacity to keep people working even through this very slow price recovery.
Lynn, you also have the Abandoned Well Reclamation Fund, which I believe the Industrial Commission or the Emergency Commission allocated $10 million of additional funds out of that fund, which I believe has around $80 million in it. Those are industry funds from our fees and costs. So there's opportunity there for the North Dakota legislature to determine to expend more funds. Question comes in, can you share who was awarded the work so that other service companies could reach out to them? I believe there were bids that came in, and I think the commission gave bids to 5 service companies that were able, or vendors that were able to, consultants that were able to conduct all these works, and efforts should be reached out to those which I think are on the website. Maybe Katie can share that website on where those grants were, or where those contracts were issued to.
Yeah, Katie, if you would share the contact information, but Tiger Well Service, ND&T Well Service, Nesset Consulting, North Plains Consulting, and Petroleum Experience got the contracts. And so as we ramp this project up and we try to get from 400 people to 600 people and from 14 rigs to 20 or 25, they're going to be looking for additional workers. And so, you know, please, by all means, contact those folks and see if there's a piece of this that you can use to put some good North Dakota citizens to work.
All right, Lynn, I think the only other comment, not seeing any additional questions coming in, would be that I believe this is the third month in a row now that the industry has reached the gas capture target. And I vividly remember it being tracked the other direction, so I hope it's tracked going this direction as well. And I would say that, you know, the challenges that COVID had brought to us in terms of continuing the infrastructure development and wanting these wells back online, I think that everything should be considered in terms of, you know, looking at that November 1 deadline, recognizing that we've met it now, but there are some huge challenges in the field, just getting people out there and getting the equipment and the infrastructure put in place. So as you know, travel is hard, and having contractors in the field is not easy either. So we would encourage the commission to recognize that we've been working really hard since last November at a 1% gain per month, and we've gotten there, but we got some new challenges here. So with that, you can continue to pop your questions in for Lynn, and I will feed them to him. But Mr. Kringstad, you've got some information that I saw you present to the Oil and Gas Research Council in terms of the restarts and some of the other numbers that I think is extremely valuable. So thanks for being here, and we'll turn it over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me here this morning. For those of you, the slide deck you're about to see, I do have that on my website now under the presentations page. I did throw a link in the chat if you want to scroll up and find that. So with that, there's a lot of information to cover. I'm going to turn off my camera as I switch over to another monitor, and we'll get right into the slide deck. Okay, great. So again, with all the events that have taken place over the last 6 months, I'm going to try and hit everything as best I can at a very high level as we move through this. Some of these slides are just going to be for reference, and as Lynn alluded to, the production decline that we were seeing from the month of April to May, unprecedented. You can see the month-to-month fluctuations for both oil and natural gas. So we were dealing with a scale that we had not even conceived of here in the recent past. So my challenge over the last several months was to try and understand what was taking place here, what can we learn, and what do we know going forward about how quickly this can recover and get North Dakota back on a production growth trend rather than seeing these green and red bars on the negative side of this graphic. So the first thing that was taking place that really hasn't gotten a lot of attention over the years, at least out in events and presentations like I provide, is starting with the base understanding of what's taking place as we continue to add more and more Bakken Three Forks wells. And so this is just a depiction of a typical decline curve for those two formations. Very similar reservoir characteristics as far as production performance goes. But where this really starts to matter is that when you start to stack up tens of thousands of these wells, we're north of 16,000 now, heading towards 40 or 60 plus thousand wells in the future. And with those decline curves, again, as you continue to stack curves on top of each other, you can see what's happened historically. So again, this is the vintage year for all Bakken Three Forks production, and I stopped at 2018 because I think it provides probably the best graphic. So at the end of 2018, as moving into 2019, the industry had to continue to add new wells in order to backfill or fill on top of this base decline curve. If completions would have gone to zero in 2019, the curve would have expected to follow this very, very steep decline. So this is what the industry is chasing day in and day out, regardless of COVID, anything else that's happening. This base decline always wants to pull that overall production curve down in the region. So adding new wells, having those completions month after month are critical, not only to maintain but grow production in the future. So just a really quick view here. I'm assuming that August production, and I'll touch on why I think that we've recovered from that May timeframe here quite strongly throughout July and the first part of August here. I think that in reality, August production is probably closer to that 1.3 million barrels per day as we're seeing it right now. But I just assumed for this graphic 1.23 million. If North Dakota production recovered up to that 1.23 million and we were to hold it consistent, how many new wells would North Dakota need to have in order to combat that base decline and keep production flat? And so again, some of the shut-ins here in the model are still coming off, but things settle in around that 60 to 70 new wells are necessary to be brought on month after month in order to keep production at where roughly I see us here in August. So again, today's activity levels are certainly nowhere near that, and I'll touch on a moment here again about what we might see in the June, July, and August numbers and what we might look like for the rest of the year. So again, base decline for crude oil, base decline for natural gas. Natural gas is not as steep from a base decline, and you can see that even if oil is holding steady, natural gas does see some increase in overall production, again, because of that gas-oil ratio and the way the reservoir operates. When we look at the month of May, I was able to identify from non-confidential wells about 6,700 plus wells that I was classifying as shut in or severely curtailed in the month of May. And I was using March as the baseline for comparing that May production to March. And you can see that of those 6,700 wells, almost 500,000 barrels of production was lost from March to May as these wells got shut in or severely curtailed. We also saw from wells that were not curtailed, 11,000 plus, that there was still roughly 100,000 barrels of production loss. So again, this is pointing towards that base decline that was working even on existing wells that were operating in March to May. We were still seeing a pretty noticeable decrease in overall production solely or almost exclusively based on the base decline that was occurring again day in and day out. The one question that I wanted to answer for May was how many of those wells were hard shut-ins versus what some might call a softer shut-in. And the way I looked at that was saying how many days on production were these wells that were in that shut-in category. So roughly 3,700 wells were what I classified as hard shut-in, right? They had 0 days on production in May for a decrease in overall volume of roughly 267,000 barrels per day. So the bulk of the shut-ins and curtailments were from hard shut-ins, both the number of wells as well as the volume impact. Again, the hard shut-ins were driving that, and you can see a mixture of other wells that were still online at least a portion of the month of May, but having significantly less impact on the overall volumes. And then also on the left-hand side, these are the wells that were not shut in. One thing we'll note over here, there was a number of idle wells, over 2,000 wells that still had 0 days on production, but because they were idle in March, they were still idle in May, they didn't get classified as shut in. So when you start looking at the aggregate numbers and comparing total idles versus what we're showing here for other idled wells or total shut-ins, keep in mind that it's a mixture of both of these graphics. And so the production pool that was responsible for most of the shut-in volume was certainly and clearly from the Bakken Three Forks formation. So what you're looking at here is the vintage year. So trying to identify how old were the wells that were being shut in, what impact did they have on the overall decrease in production. And so again, overwhelmingly, the wells that were shut in that were making an impact on North Dakota's production were from the Bakken and Three Forks system. You can see in gray some of the legacy vertical production from the 80s or the 70s, but below on the bottom portion of this graphic, very negligible impact on overall production. And so while these wells may be slower to come online because they had lower production levels or more challenges because of age, again, their contribution to statewide volumes is much smaller. And when we look at some of these newer wells, this gives me confidence that the industry with the relatively new production, newer wells, that these could be brought online relatively quickly. And I think that a large portion of these, as we sit today, this morning, I think a lot of them already have. Each individual operator was unique. Again, the top 15 operators that had the biggest changes March to May and their mixture. So again, no two operators were identical in how they were handling this, their positions, their hedges, and their financial obligations. So again, no real cookie cutters that we can point to for a best fit in North Dakota. Everyone had their own unique positioning in this situation. And then there was a slight difference between the shut-in, not shut-in, a little bit higher water cut ratio for the shut-in wells, 2.1 versus 1.7. So we were seeing a little bit of a driver on that water cut for water handling and disposal being one of the major expenses for operators. Overall production was about identical between the shut-in and not shut-in on average. So again, water cut and then individual operator decisions seem to be the biggest drivers in the month of May. And so how quickly can this return, or how quickly has it returned? And so with less than 2,000 wells coming back online, and I think Lynn even pointed to this here earlier, that I think his number, if I'm recalling correctly, was right around 2,000 wells, or give or take, had been reactivated. And so if 28% of these wells that I identified as shut-in were to come back online, 70+% of production could be brought online, because again, these were good wells before they were shut in. They were identified because they had higher production levels, lower water cuts, and again, I think a large portion of these have already throughout either July or the first part of August been brought back online. And so that is what's leading me to believe that production in North Dakota is closer to that 1.3 million barrels per day when compared to the the 860,000 that it was in May. So you'll see in a moment some of my forecasts going forward. So I do show that in my base case scenario, those production curtailments coming down rapidly. The month of July saw the biggest month-over-month change, and then continuing to come off in August, and I show them ending in my base case scenario by the end of the calendar year. So again, a lot of unknown here, but again, having to have some type of assumption to go into the models, this is what I'm going to continue to run with. So where does oil production go? Again, using the EIA price deck, I'm going to show you the strip price deck here in a moment. The EIA and trying to reasonably expect what the industry might do from an activity standpoint, you see the production curtailments coming off, and then a very quick leveling off using the EIA's price deck for driving activity in the region. Activity from a completion standpoint, again, these are the assumptions. I won't spend a whole lot of time here. But again, far lower than what we've seen over the last number of years, at least in the near term, before things start to normalize 2 or 3 years out. And then Lynn, I think, covered this very well. Again, the resource in the ground and the long-term capabilities and options for the region are still, I think, very optimistic for the industry and for the state. The opportunity is still there going forward. This is another graphic, again, just for reference for folks that are interested in what completions do to the production model. Again, 60 to 70 completions per month, give or take in that range in order to keep production in that steady. And if you're below that, you'll likely come up and then come back down. So that comment I made earlier, as we see production coming back up, it might be a bit of a false positive. If the completions are not high enough after the months of August and September, we might see this peak up in production coming into August, and then we might start to see it sliding back down again. So again, I don't want there to be any false hope or optimism that someone could draw a straight line that coming from the June-May timeframe and they could continue this going up. If the completions are not there, it will likely come back up and start to drop back down. So that's probably one of my biggest messages here is following the industry activity, following what the frac crews are doing. That will show us an early indicator of what the end of 2020 and the first part of 21 will look like. And so this also gave me some confidence. If we removed shut-ins from the equation and just looked at pure activity, that still by the month of August puts us at about 1.3. So just a spot check, ignoring shut-ins, assuming they come back online August, we should be around that 1.3 million barrels per day. Just for reference, I won't spend a whole lot of time here just looking at what the model does using the New York Strip, not New York Strip, the NYMEX forward curve, and what it does to the production model versus the EIA. And then last but not least, I'm going to switch gears here to natural gas. Ron asked me to cover this just very quickly, looking at, again, the shut-ins coming back online, and then a more robust curve, as we've always seen over the last 10 plus years in North Dakota. Natural gas just does better than crude oil when we look at the curves and the gas oil ratios and everything else that's taking place. So natural gas, I still have a very optimistic outlook for that industry. That does not come without challenges. Obviously, looking at the needs for immediate term on gas processing appears to be well positioned. Long term, we're still looking at what needs exist out there, what the timing of those projects will be. And then obviously on the transmission side, a lot of attention recently on Northern Border and trying to understand how that will work itself through at the FERC level, whether or not there's going to be BTU restrictions on the receipt points in North Dakota, what that would look like for opportunities for using those NGLs in-state, power generation, petchem. Do we need additional transmission out of the region? All those questions being looked at right now. So again, a lot of information thrown out there. I'd be glad to answer any questions from Ron or anyone else if they haven't come in already here on the chat window.
Justin, we got a great question here. I'm not sure if you you know what it is, but how many frac crews do we currently have operating in North Dakota? I think we were at 25 in February, and we were down to 1. And today we probably have 2 or 3, unless you were Justin, have data that's any different to that. And then how many do we need to complete 60 to 70 wells per month to keep production flat? And I think this is really we'll just expand on this question. It was the question I was going to have as well, and that we know that drilling rigs and completion crews are what drives the economy and drives the jobs. And when you go back to that slide of yours, Justin, on the completions per month, and you know, we can almost put some price triggers in there, but Lynn, you usually have a slide talking about the variables out there that are kind of the rain clouds or whatever you usually call them. And certainly we've got the DAPL decision, we've got the price of oil, we've got the election, so if you guys can kind of work your way through this question, but this is really the key question, is what's it going to take to stimulate investment into the Bakken? I call it full throttle Bakken, 55 rigs, $20 million a month, 100 completions per month. Access to capital is really, really difficult. And I don't see a big adjustment because of those rain clouds out there for the remainder of 2020, certainly, and maybe midway, 2/3 of the way through 2021. So if you guys want to answer some of that in addition to what I've kind of laid out.
And yep, so I'll share this, Lynn, if you have some comments.
The current activity is, and right now we're counting 3 frac crews. So very, very low activity, but certainly better than the worst month, which was in May when we dropped down to 1. 25 down to 1. We think we're back up to 3. Our best estimate is that it takes 15 to 20 frac crews to maintain production. And it probably takes 25 to follow 55 rigs to grow production and accomplish that 100 to 120 completions a month.
Yep.
I don't know, Justin, if you want to talk about the uncertainties, but yeah, I haven't done one of those slides in a while. I should probably do one of those storm cloud slides, because we've got all this litigation that's going on. So of course, the MHA tribe has now filed a lawsuit over the M decision over the riverbed minerals on Fort Berthold. The DAPL lawsuit lingers. And of course, there was a ruling that the pipeline could continue to operate, but that's somewhat tenuous in that at any given point, if they decide the EIS is inadequate, they can shut the pipeline down. So that's a $5 or $6 change in real prices in North Dakota. The northern border tariff issue is going to severely impact our gas capture ability and our gas marketing and pricing going forward. And then all of the politics. So we have some significant state elections this year, in terms of the North Dakota legislature and in terms of the new thing, Measure 3, but on the national Congress, the Senate, and the presidential election are monumental markers sitting out there that we have to get past. I don't see much capital moving or much planning for robust activity until we get past that.
Yeah, and I'll second Lynn on the completion side. I think he covered that very well. Certainly today's completion crew numbers are not going to be adequate in order to keep that production curve growing once we get through this uptick from the shut-ins, and then I'm expecting we'll see some sliding here throughout the remainder of 2020.
Again, if you have questions, put them into the Q&A session, and thanks to everybody that's been doing that. Lynn, you've been chairing the Industrial Commission Bakken Restart Task Force. I think that's the name of it. So had a lot of discussions with other regulatory agencies, seeing any initiatives coming forth out of that. Obviously, the Petroleum Council is looking at this, and we'll be ramping up our legislative committee in early September. But are you seeing any other initiatives that can come forth which really can keep the Bakken and North Dakota competitive in terms of getting back to work here?
We're really not, Ron, and it's a great disappointment. We're going to continue to meet and push, but we really need to have your folks and everybody talking to North Dakota administrative leadership on the need for more regulatory relief. We did see some movement on the part of the Public Service Commission in terms of waiving fees and decreasing the timelines on some things, but that's about all we've seen. The good news, I guess, that the ozone SIP lawsuit in North Dakota is going to be left out of that, but we haven't seen any movement on what we're going to do with T-norm. That process, it just continues to be bogged down in preliminary reviews and permits after construction and what we're going to do. And now there's a new concern being raised about lead 210. So the T-norm issue is not moving. And so I continue to hammer away at the message that Empower, and I'm grateful that Empower brought this forward, that we have too many rules, that we have seen a deteriorating business climate, and that we need to make sure that we've got succession planning in place for our top regulators. And we also really need to all be looking at fees and rules and regulations. And if something is not needed during the COVID pandemic, is it needed at all? So we're going to continue to meet and push on that, but we have not seen really the Department of Environmental Quality or trust lands step up with any kind of regulatory relief. Seen a little bit from the Public Service Commission, and our North Dakota government and administrative leaders need to hear that message, that these folks need to be in the game.
Well, I think we would echo that, and certainly we've seen great reaction actually from the federal agencies and more relief today, and really just a right sizing, smart sizing, common sense regulations out of EPA in terms of, revising 50-year-old rules that just have a better way of doing them today. So I got a couple questions here. Lynn, have the cost to restart Bakken wells been as expected?
Great question. And so I think what we've actually seen is that the majority of the wells were never hard shut in. So what we've seen is that most of the wells were just restricted in terms of their production rather than hard shut in. And those that were hard shut in have not been left shut in for months. So we're really uncertain about that. We have not seen any data to indicate that that restart cost is going to be what we originally projected. Justin is doing some work for us, and right after Labor Day, we're going to sit down with the Restart Task Force and really try to come up with a targeted low-interest loan grant program through North Dakota Commerce and the Bank of North Dakota for the specific wells that need that kickstart. And so if you have input that we can throw into that mix, please do so. No data really to indicate that the costs were correctly estimated or what the costs are going to be, or even how many wells are going to need it.
And I think that's exactly right, Lynn. My initial reactions were from gathering data from producers where there was, going to be big costs involved. And I know one large producer, I think there was so much work by the engineers that went into that process over that couple period of time where the word idle maybe is more appropriate than shut in. And somebody said, yeah, it was $20, not, 200,000. So not going to be the same for everybody. The other question that we've got you guys here is, how does the DAPL decision impact the shut-in or back to work forecast? I would just say from my standpoint, I really thought it had an impact on those idle wells not coming back on the Monday after the 4th of July. But you guys can talk about what we've probably seen now with some of this, the pushing out of the having to empty the pipeline in terms of how many wells are coming back on now in the last week or two.
Yeah, I think there was, from my discussions with folks, once there was some certainty surrounding that decision out in DC from the court system, that there was some near-term confidence from producers that if there were some wells that had not been brought back online yet or needed to be opened up further, they had some confidence then that August, September, at least in the near term, they were going to be able to move that crude oil down that system to the premium markets down on the Gulf Coast. So again, near-term confidence. I think Lynn earlier touched on some of the longer-term uncertainties surrounding the project and how that EIS is going to continue to play out with the Corps of Engineers and some of the risks long-term that still linger out there. So Lynn, if you have any other thoughts?
No, I sure don't. I do want to encourage people that through the Department of Commerce and through the Governor's Office, we continue to explore all of those long-term gas capture options that we've seen out there. And we have some interest from foreign investors in petrochem. So we're continuing to push forward with that, realizing that this is, although hugely significant, it's a temporary interruption, and that long-term to sustain 91% capture, we've got to come up with some profitable way for your gas and your gas liquids to get to market.
Justin, we've seen a few of the midstream, particularly the natural gas projects, kind of put on the shelf for various reasons. Some economic, some COVID. The Outrigger plant still continues to go forward. Are you seeing any other projects come forth in terms of new permitting or anything in the pipeline per se in terms of gas or oil pipelines that are going to be helpful? I know MDU had a project last week that they announced they're going to upsize.
Yeah, so on the processing side, obviously there were some delays, some suspensions, either COVID related or market conditions related. Those will continue to work themselves out here over the next 2 to 3 years. Long term, I'm still seeing substantial interest from the midstream industry for new projects beyond the 2024 type window, where we're looking at potential shortages. So I think, again, in the near term, we're pretty well positioned. From a processing standpoint, the challenge will be, again, some of the intra-field dynamics, making sure that all the gas that can flow does. And then long term, some of those bigger issues on the transmission side will be the most pressing. Those have been issues that we haven't had to deal with very much. They're in the first phase of the Bakken development, but they're quickly becoming a major issue for us.
Okay, gentlemen, I think we have answered all of the questions that have come in, and if anybody has any additional questions, we are recording this session and we will make it available through the via the Petroleum Council and distribute it out to the attendees and our members probably in our morning clips tomorrow. Lynn's slides will be available on the links provided here at the Department of Mineral Resources website. The three of us are presenting the North Dakota Legislative Budget section later on today. So I expect many of the same questions and the same issues will come forth from the budget makers as terms of what the outlook is going forward. And for those listeners, if there are other ideas that you may have about sessions similar to this that you'd like to see over the next few months, please contact me or my staff, as we greatly appreciate you guys taking the time today. I think it was very valuable information, and hopefully we'll have something about this, about a big Bakken rebound in the very near future. But with that, thank you very much. Thank you to the attendees. Thanks again for our sponsors, and have a great day and a great week, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Ron.
Thanks for your time.